Hello everybody, I'm Sean, and throughout these tutorials I'm going to be showing you how to build your very first video game in GameMaker Studio 2. This time around we're not going to write any code, and we're just going to use the built-in drag and drop interface for all of our game logic. By the end, hopefully our game will look something like this, okay? Simple, top-down action game with a few enemies to shoot at, explode, a little player, shoots bullets around, all very cool. Let's get started first of all by looking at how to just put our player on the screen and move him around. So this is what an empty project looks like inside GameMaker. So you can see all of the different resources in your project over on the right on the resource tree, and any resources you have open for editing will be here in what's called the workspace. The very first thing we're going to want to do as part of this tutorial is create a sprite. Okay, that's going to be an image for our player character. So I'm going to right click in sprites in the resource tree and hit create. Okay, and you can see that opens up in the workspace. We can move around the workspace just by sort of clicking and dragging with the middle mouse button. You can also zoom in and out with control on the mouse wheel and do various other things. So now we have the sprite open. What we're going to do is first of all call it spr_player. Okay, that's just to identify that it's a sprite and that it's our player. You can name it whatever you like really, but I advise sticking to a naming convention such as this for reasons that will become clear the more we develop the project. So as you can see at the moment this image is just totally blank, so let's go ahead and import our player sprite. I'm going to click import. If you're following along on YouTube, all of the resources I'm using will be available linked in the description for you to download. If you're following along through the IDE tutorial, then just by clicking import, the tutorial should bring you automatically to the correct folder where I've got all of these. You don't have to use these images. You can use whatever images you like, but these are the ones I'm going to be using throughout this tutorial. So I'm going to bring in spr_player. Okay, that's a little UFO thing. So that's our player sprite, and over here where it says origin 00, you can see there's like a little crosshair in the top left of the image, just right there. If you click anywhere on the image with the left mouse button, you can place that. It determines kind of the center point of your image, okay? So I'm going to place that directly in the center of this image, middle center. It also determines like when you rotate the image, like where it's anchored, like what point it rotates around, okay? So that's why we want this in the center. Very important, okay? So now we have the sprite. The next thing we want to do is create an object. So an object can be thought of as kind of a blueprint for logic, interactivity, and behaviors in your game, okay? Our player is going to want to have an object representing it. Our enemies, when we come to create them, they'll have objects for them, so we'll have bullets and so on. The reason I say it's a blueprint is because the object can be thought of as defining the logic and the behavior and so on of a particular game element, and then when you actually put those objects into your rooms, as we'll come to later, and into your game world, you're not actually putting the object there, you're putting instances or copies of that original blueprint there, okay, which we refer to in GameMaker as an instance of an object, okay? You'll be able to see what I mean by that in a minute, okay? So right click in objects now and hit create, and you'll see that it creates a new object in our workspace. So this object is going to represent our player, okay? So I'm going to name it in the very similar to the way I named the player sprite. I'm going to name this obj_player, okay? Just as a simple way to define that that's the player sprite and this is the player object, okay? Don't want to both call them both player, that would lead to all sorts of problems. So the first thing I want to do with this object is change its sprite. So currently it's not got a sprite associated with it, so I'm going to associate it with the sprite we just created, our player sprite, okay? So when an instance of this object appears in the game world, it will appear with that sprite. So over here in this events box is where I'll actually put all of the logic and interactivity in the game, okay? We'll define events and say when this happens, do this, and so on. But let's just see what the game actually looks like running. So if we go to rooms in your resource tree, you'll notice that GameMaker creates a room for you by default whenever you make a new project, okay? It's called room 0. And that's because a GameMaker game always needs to have at least one room in order to be able to actually run, okay? And you see at the moment it's just a big blank empty space. Okay, this grid is just placed there by the editor. You can turn that on or off. So let's drag in our player object. Then we'll just click and drag and bring him into the room. Okay, so he's there. You can put him anywhere. I can actually double click on him and click edit, and I can actually edit that object inside the room editor if I need to. But yeah, that's a copy. You see, if I double click that, it says instance. So this is an instance of obj_player. And I can edit the original object, and that's the original object blueprint. You can kind of see what I mean now, that defines this instance. Okay, because we can put multiple copies of this into the room. Let's delete those now. Okay, so let's just run this and see what we have so far. You'll see it compiles at the bottom here, and then boom, here is our game in a window. It's not very exciting at the moment. It's just a big black rectangle with a little player in the middle. Okay, so what we're going to do is make it so this player can move around with the arrow keys, and will also face towards sort of the mouse cursor. Okay, just sort of basic movement controls is what we're going to cover here. Okay, so let's come back to our player object just by double clicking. It'll bring us back to this workspace. We can close down the room editor because we don't need that right now. And it's time to actually add our first piece of game logic, okay? So click Add Event. You can see a bunch of different events here, and a lot of them are just things that happen in the game, okay? That's what an event is. It's a when this happens, something in the game has happened, like a frame of the game has passed, you've pressed a certain key, you've clicked on this instance, this instance collided with another instance, and so on and so forth. What we're going to do is add the key down event for right, okay? So for our right arrow key, that's what that represents, and you can see this pops up a code editor, okay? So events are when this happens, and code and actions are do this, okay? So when these things happen, do these things, and that's fundamentally how object logic in GameMaker works, even when you're working with code. So what do we want to happen when the right arrow key is pressed? Well, we want to move our object to the right, okay? And now what we're going to do is use an action to do that. So scroll down this list of actions over here in the toolbox, over to where it says movement, and find this little icon here, jump to point, and jump to the specified position. So we're going to move our instance from the place it is now to a different place. So let's just click and drag that into this box, and you can see over here we have a summary of all the actions we've placed in this event, and here is where we can edit what they do. Just you can use the middle mouse button to move around, just as you can with most of the rest of the interface. Okay, so it needs two coordinates from us that we want to move to, an x coordinate and a y coordinate. So x0 and y0 is the top left of your game room. Okay, if I just go to the room editor, this is 0, 0. Okay. And as we increase our x-coordinate, we move further and further to the right, and as we increase our y-coordinate, we move further and further down, okay? And if we decrease those, we go the other way. So let's go back here. So what we want to do is just increase our x-coordinate to move to the right, okay? So I'm going to change this to 4, and I'm going to tick these boxes here that say is relative, because we don't just want to move to x4, y0. That would put us like somewhere around here, just like 4 pixels to the right and 0 pixels down in the game room, whereas we're starting here, so we want to move relative to where we currently are. So by ticking these, we add 4 and add 0 to our x and y coordinate respectively, okay? So let's run the game and just see that working. Okay, so now we have this again. We just have a big black box in our player, but if I press the right arrow key, our player actually moves to the right now, okay? Now we just need to do the exact same thing for our different buttons, okay? So I'm going to add an event for key down left. I'm going to drag in the same, just the recently used box up here, jump to point action. Okay, I'm going to tick both the is relative boxes again. Very important to remember to do that. And this time I'm going to move to -4, okay? So I'm going to subtract 4 from our x-coordinate and move left, okay? So let's see that working. Just run that real quick. So I'll move to the right, and if I press left, I move to the left. Excellent, okay. Now let's add up and down. It's done in the exact same way. So key down, up, drag in, jump to point, and this time tick both these boxes. This time we want to move up, so we want to reduce our y-coordinate. So put -4 in there, okay. And let's just add our down event as well, and do the same thing. So is relative, this time increase by 4. Okay, so you see now, we just go through those, we have 4 of this action, all just doing different things to our coordinates. So let's just run that now. And obviously, like, on a given frame, if we're holding up and we're holding right, then it's going to both add 4 to our x and subtract 4 from our y, meaning we can move diagonally, okay? As I can demonstrate by just holding up and left. But I can move in any direction now, or any of the 8 directions allowed to us by our arrow keys, I suppose. And that's the basics of just moving around. So the last thing we're going to do is make it so our player object actually rotates to face wherever our mouse cursor is, because that'll be kind of like our crosshair, our direction that we want to shoot later. We'll shoot with the mouse button, okay? So we want to make our player always face towards the mouse, okay, even though we can move around sort of strafe with our arrow keys. So let's add another event. This time we're going to add the step event, okay? You can see it's the little footprints, and there's 3 of these: step, begin step, and end step. We just want the regular step event, so click that. The step event's a very special event. It happens every single frame of the game that passes, okay? So if your game is running at 60 frames a second, this will happen 60 times every second, okay? Whatever logic you put in here. Now what we want to happen is every frame of the game we want to check where our mouse button is, or where our mouse cursor is, sorry, adjust our object's direction to face it, and then adjust the sprite to rotate to face the mouse, okay? So what we're going to do is I'm going to scroll down to movement again and find this as sort of a dotted arrow with a dot on it, set point direction, okay? Sets a direction towards a specified point. So I'm going to drag this in, and you can see it asks us to provide an x and a y coordinate again. We don't want the relative boxes this time. But if I type mouse into x here, you can see a menu pops up because GameMaker is trying to guess what we want from it. We can type more than, as you can see, we can type more than just numbers into x and y. Okay, we can provide what's called variables and functions, which are basically words that words or commands to GameMaker that will turn into numbers. Okay, for this, what we want is mouse x, which is a built-in variable. Click that, and what this word means, what mouse underscore x means, is it's just a word in GameMaker that every single frame will track the x coordinate of our mouse cursor, okay, in the game. And we do the exact same thing for y. I'm just going to type it in, mouse underscore y, okay? Now, basically what that means is our mouse is always going to, our object's always going to have the direction facing towards wherever our mouse coordinate is on the screen. Now that won't actually be enough to do what we want. That'll set our direction for the object, for the instance, sorry, but it won't actually change the way the sprite looks, okay, because those two things are independent of each other. You can have an instance direction, but you can also have an image angle kind of thing, okay, so like the sprite's direction, which way the image is facing, because you might not always want to change the image direction to face where the instance is facing, because you can also do things like use your direction to create speed and so on and so forth. You can do other things with your instance direction. So what we want to do is just change the instance rotation, okay, so the image rotation. So I'm going to scroll down to, if I remember where it is, instances, of course, yeah. So set instance rotation. You see this little Pac-Man image is often representing things you can do with the sprite. This one with a little arrow going around the outside, that's instance rotation. So drag this in. That's to set the instance rotation. Now, what we want to do is, after we've set our direction to that, okay, what that's done is adjusted a variable inside this instance called direction, okay, and it's set that direction to be facing towards our mouse. So all we actually have to do in here, instead of providing an exact angle, we just type the word direction, and that's a built-in variable, and it's one we've just adjusted through this, okay? So by setting that, it'll make our actual image face towards the mouse. And that angle's around wherever you place the origin on the sprite, which is why we placed it in the center before. So if I run the game now, what we should hopefully find is, yep, our player now faces directly towards wherever our mouse cursor is on the screen. So I can move around any direction and move the mouse around, and the player will always face that direction, okay? So there you go, that's the sort of basic movement we were going for in this part of the tutorial. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed that, and I'll catch you guys next time, where we'll be creating some bullet objects for us to actually shoot, okay? See you then. Thanks, guys.